Sherry, and welcome, welcome, welcome. It's Dr. Boserman and I again, and we are so glad to be here again. And this is our last series. If you are healthy, if you are not stressed, you are among the very, very few. Dr. Boserman and I have really just talked to so many different districts since our last session. Just really, people are just overwhelmed. And I know that you're not hearing anything new, but, we just want to validate that, teachers are, some have broken, some are about to break. Educators are just having to do so much. It's funny because, I think a lot of times, we're so focused on the kids, which is what's obviously we all got into this business for that reason. But I think sometimes we're forgetting the people that are supporting our kids. So again, as you said, as we work through this, we talking about multi-tier systems of support. Hopefully we can just kind of acknowledge that we need to provide that multi-tier systems of support for our educators as well, especially teachers that are going in and doing this every day and so on and so forth. So we really appreciate you guys being here, whether you're watching this live or, like you said, downloading it and going to watch it at a later date. We're going to do just a little bit of a, like I said, overview, and then we'll talk about really evaluation. We're going to do a couple of polls, and then, like I said, end up. What we'd like to do is, Dr. Bosman and I, we're just really going to share a lot of the kind of the questions that will come up during the evaluation. But we also know is we obviously do not have all the answers. So if in the chat, if you hear of a piece of a component of MTSS, or somebody comes up and says, well, I had that same problem, and share your positives and your failures. I've learned so much through failing, and so please don't hesitate to share that as well. What we're going to do is we're going to be talking, and before I do, Dr. Bosman, you just want to say hello?
Yes, hello everybody. I was answering a question in the chat, but yeah, glad that you're here. I can answer this out loud. We will not have our cameras on. You'll see the slides, but you'll get the audio. So you shouldn't see either one of us.
Right?
But
that's a good thing, right?
That's a good thing. Even though I'm having a great hair day, you'll hear the audio with the slides. So I'll just go ahead and type that in there. But yeah, welcome to everybody. We're glad you're here.
Thank you. So so this is our fourth webinar. We're really looking at, just like you said, an evaluation, and we kind of deem that as asking lots of questions. How are we doing? What do we need to change, and those kind of things. So we're just going to touch on the framework that we've been highlighting through the whole series. Just briefly talk about leadership. Obviously, the two main components, if you're going to deliver MTSS, you're going to have to really understand what problem solving is and what database decision is. Obviously, the RTI process that we've been dealing with for a while. How do we implement? So what questions surrounding about communication? And then, of course, how do we capture all that? Dr. Bosman and I will just share, briefly, something we quickly put together that we showed before about really how we can capture that. So that's what we're going to do. But before we kind of move on and get into it, we've got our first poll question. And what we want to do is really ask kind of what statement best represents you. So Sherry's going to go ahead and upload that first one, and we'll just take the time to kind of just wait until you guys answer that, and then we'll process here in a second. Is that being okay? Sherry, is that poll being posted?
Sorry, I was on double secret mute. Yes, it should be posted right now.
Okay.
Yep, I see the results coming in.
Oh, okay. I don't see it.
Maybe click on Surveys tab.
Oh, that might help.
I don't know if it will, but I'm just making that suggestion.
Thank you, Sherry. Yes. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, we'll just take a few more seconds. Looks like we got some people coming in. That's good. Well, Dr. Bosman, what do you think?
Well, I'm looking at it, and the leaderboard right now does not surprise me.
Yeah, me neither.
See that, a lot of people are trying to do MTSS, but it is hard to get everybody in line with what you're trying to do. Oversight can be difficult at times. And we, Dr. Marafa, you and I have talked offline several times, is people still just trying to find components, how they want to build it, how they want to put it in place. So, yeah, I see that looking at efficacy as well, that's kind of running down there. And then COVID, of course. It can be
not surprised. It's many of the conversations that we've had, and we totally understand it. We've done a lot of consulting with that, districts that have reached out to us and so on and so forth. So that being said, obviously what we want to be able to do is really look at, do we have those components? Even some of the people that, that chose A, that are looking for those components, but also again is how do we ensure fidelity so that we can get a strong efficacy of programs and a strong efficacy for our teachers. We know that strong efficacy drives student achievement and student progress. So obviously it's important for us to do that. We'll talk about that. But here's the big picture. We've showed this over and over. We've added a little bit at a time. We've added a little bit at the bottom about understanding at this point, are we communicating what our purpose is for MTSS, our efforts and so on? We'll talk about that. And again, are we really hooking in the teachers, getting that feedback from parents, those kind of things? Those are questions we want to ask, really try to understand the components and so on. And that's really all we're going to do today is just to ask specific questions about this framework that you're looking. We're going to break them down into pieces. And then Adam and I are really just going to talk about, what districts have shared with us from just their experience. And like I said, if you've got something in the chat and you've noticed something that's worked for you, that, something comes up, please share it. You guys, obviously, on this call, we've got, such an amazing breadth of experience and success. So please don't hesitate to share. And like I said, sometimes we want to share a failure because non-examples can be just as powerful as positive ones. I know I have a few. So like I said, we're going to break this particular framework down and kind of get into how we evaluate where we're at and so on. And the first thing we're going to do is really looking at leadership, where we see the breakdown. We've had a lot of districts. I know, Dr. Bosman, I've talked to districts about just this idea that why are we doing this? What's this for? Is this just another flavor? Is this just, how is this different than RTI? And when we get it down to the bottom, and the bottom line is, what are we doing? And I know that some districts do it really well. Why we're actually trying to implement a multi-tier systems of support. And then we hear, Doug, I feel like we've got everybody bought into why, but we're not given the resources. This happens in education a lot. So, where do I get these resources to support those things that we know we need to do? Some districts have been really good about really advocating. We know that what's worked in the past, at least the districts I've worked with, is when you can provide testimonies to examples of how MTSS has made such a large difference to your student progress, whether it's been attendance, grades, graduation, more students taking AP tests. I mean, pick your variables and share those. And I know some of the people in the districts have said they've got a lot of ground traction on being able to share that in order to garner more resources. And then, of course, time. And the only thing I've heard in my experience where people have said is you got to make the time and you got to prioritize. And the ones that meet regularly and are checking in on those benchmarks. So as we start to ask these questions, that's really what we're going to be looking at. So, Adam, anything on leadership?
Yeah, I think you alluded to it in the very beginning, is what I call synthesis. Is what I mean by that is, are we collecting data about things that we want to change. Are we collecting the right components of data?
Yeah.
Are we looking at the right data? And then you can do the analytics after that. But your analytics aren't going to show anything if you're not collecting the right data to show you how to make the change.
Yeah.
So census is a key component.
We believe that in order to really make sure that we are seeing a strong implementation of MTSS with fidelity, we've got to have a strong problem-solving process and a database decision. Those are two different things. And the questions that you see are really trying to understand is, Doug, we can't even get to the point where we're identifying things because we don't understand the problem. We don't have a way to really define or analyze the issues that we have going on in our school, our classrooms, or our district. And the key here is to operationalize those problems. A lot of people fail to reach that fidelity because they have nothing to measure. If you're not able to operationalize your problems, how are you supposed to measure them? And once we do, and again, I would spend a lot of time on that first one to ask yourselves those questions. Do we truly have that? Then what we can say is start asking, do we have that continuum of interventions? Dr. Bosman and I, we talked a lot about that, interventions, but do you have those interventions at those tier levels, which we'll talk about in a second? And have you shared those particular MTA goals and objectives? We know, and again, is we see academic benchmarks all the time. Again, where we don't see it is those social emotional or those behavioral, which tie into MTSS. So a lot of times we focus on instruction, which is what we should be because that's why we're at school. But in order to increase that student progress, we've got to ask ourselves, are we really clear about our definitions and our problems? Looking at implementation, again, as we talk more about it here in a second, is, those questions that you ask is, Doug, we're doing a great job of defining it, but we're just not implementing. We're not implementing our components. Well, why? Maybe you don't have the right resources. Maybe you don't have the right tools to monitor. Or maybe you're not doing a very good job of evaluating at benchmarks at different variables during the school year instead of waiting till the end of the year. So again, defining that process of problem solving, those are the questions you want to ask in order to see where you're missing those elements. And then when you flip to the next side, you're looking at, in order to work through that problem solving process, I've got to be able to have a database decision-making model, which is what Dr. Bosman just said. He talked about, you guys are being asked, what data do we collect and what tools do we use to collect that data? We want to know if teachers are feeling good about those practices or that students are responding to those practices. Well, how are we going to know if MTSS is working if we don't really have the data collection tools to give us that picture? We've got to have a way as again, we've seen a lot of districts, I know the ones I work with that struggle is, they're starting to find ways to collect the data, but they're just not spending the time and being able to organize in order to analyze. And again, that takes time, and that's not because they don't know how. It's because of time. If you're not going to buy a tool that's going to do it for yourself, then you're going to have to process that on your own. And so again, we recommend just being able to say, how do we organize it in a way that allows us to analyze it so that we can determine up or down trends? Is this working? And the only way we're going to know if we're going to be making those decisions, and again, that's going to be through that problem-solving process, we've got to have a database decision-making model that allows us to say, we're getting good data, and that's going to allow us to make really good database decisions. Dr. Bosman?
Sorry, trying to move over to get off the double secret mute again. But yeah, I mean, I think, and people are putting in the chat as well, is one of their issues is sometimes money and resources, knowing what to do, where to go. We kind of have a plan, and then we kind of don't. And then how are we getting everybody involved in this plan? And I've always thought, from a teaching standpoint, teachers want to know, why am I doing this, and how is it going to impact me in the long run?
Yeah.
I think you always have to have that in mind. So, yep.
Okay. Cool. Well, the next, we're going to talk about the RTI. So again, this is the how do we evaluate, which again, I think you guys can get into some of those benchmarks that you guys can share that will get more buy-in. For example, when on the tier 1 is, have you guys, when you ask those questions of, have we been able to establish an effective core instructional curriculum? Obviously, the state says these are the standards by which we want to meet. The district says we're going to write a curriculum that includes those state standards. And so we've got to come up with a way of saying, as we look at this curriculum, do we have those strategies, those core curriculums? Do we have reading initiatives, math initiatives, science, art, music, physical education, all those things that are important, science, social studies, all of it's important. Do we have a core that allows teachers to adopt those things that can move kids to the next level? And again, that's the questions you got to ask. And these are, again, these questions to the right where it says, what components do we need? Do you have them in place? Are you implementing them? Are you implementing with fidelity? Obviously, administrators, instructional specialists, they're moving in and out of the classroom. They're looking at this. But again, are those observations, are they tied to that MTSS structure? And that structure means that, are we tying what our core curriculum that we develop based on those state standards? Are we making progress? And then, of course, what needs to be removed, what needs to be adjusted, and what needs to be added? Same thing about behavior. If we're going to adopt the positive behavior interventions and supports, what kind of core curriculum are we going to establish at the school-wide and the classroom, classroom system that all teachers can adopt? Being at the door and greeting kids that can be part of your behavioral curriculum, that we expect all teachers, every single one, to do that. So again, have we established what those are? And then same thing about SEL. We want kids, the big 5, self-management. You talk about responsible decision-making, social, being able to really socially identify with other kids, all the CASEL competencies that we look at, self-management. Are we promoting those? And do we know what those look like? And again, do you have a core social emotional learning curriculum? And if you don't develop it, if you can't develop it, go purchase it. But the bottom line is, that's what those kind of questions are. You can't ask if they're going to work if we're not asking, do we have those developed? So again, ask those about components. Is it implemented? Is it met with fidelity? And just move your way down the hierarchy. And don't forget, Dr. Bogdan and I, we shared last time with the idea that these tier levels of intervention don't necessarily have to be different in name. They just have to be different in how long we use them, how intensive, and then how frequent. So don't get caught up into that my tier strategies have to be different names or different total strategies at tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. Remember, we can change the diff when we ask what is the diff to make sure we do that. And that's where we go to the tier 2. Same thing. This isn't anything you guys have not tried to adopt. This has been around for a while. But again, the evaluative questions that we're looking at is, Doug, I can walk into 5 classrooms and I can ask 5 teachers, what are the core components for a student that is at a targeted tier? What are 5 or what are 3 or what are 2? What are targeted strategies that you can use as a teacher during instruction? And if it doesn't roll off their tongue, then we really haven't taught a targeted core of what teachers can go to, the tools. And a lot of times this is struggling teachers and new teachers. Master teachers, they got it. But when you're asking for an evaluative, you're going to know that there's going to be a spectrum, that you've got some teachers on that are masters and some that are really struggling. But you got to find out is what are they struggling with? Doug, I don't even know what to use. Or Doug, I know what to use, but I'm not able to use it effectively. Well, let's find out why. Same thing with behavior. Again, there's a difference between classroom management and behavioral management. And when you guys are setting the tone of PBIS, we want kids to respond. But again, looking at do you have those components in place for tier 2? Again, can my teachers give me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 strategies that I would do for tier 2 kids? And the same thing again for SEL. What are some social emotional learning strategies that I might target for my tier 2? My kids that say, Doug, all my kids don't need a conference break, a cool down, a timeout to self-manage, to self-talk, And so again, do my teachers have that in place where they say, yeah, we're implementing those SEL strategies at the tier 2 level? Well, are you dealing with fidelity? Yep. We were trained on it. That's how we're delivering it. Okay. You making any progress on it? No. Okay. Well, let's find out why. Or yes. Okay. Well, let's keep doing that. Let's now make that an institutional way of how we do things. Institutional effectiveness means that we have created this routine, and we've got to start creating these routines for our teachers. And then the last one again is the RTI for tier 3. Those intensive strategies works the same way. Again, have we committed to strategies that our teachers can adopt and that are evident when you go into the classroom? And I don't mean, the first week of school. It's the first month, the first quarter, the first 12 weeks, the first, the half the year, is we're seeing evidence that these strategies are not only in place, but they're being used. They're being used with fidelity and consistency, and we're seeing progress. Why? Because you guys are constantly benchmarking not just academics, but behavioral progress and social emotional progress. And again, if you're able to evaluate and really link those strategies, those components that you start to see progress, then you're going to start to see where teachers adopt it, and it's going to permeate throughout your whole climate. And the moment we can start functioning that way, because that's really what climate is, now you're going to create this culture. And that's really the only way you change that and get teachers to buy in, is if you're able to do that. And remember this, is that, I'll save on that when we talk about efficacy, how we're trying to get to that efficacy. So Dr. Bowerman, you got any kind of reflection on just the RTI process? And
which was good, because there was a question, a very honest question in the box that said, they've been through all 3 videos, still not really understanding what the MTSS components should be. And I responded, as you're speaking about them, is you're really thinking about those 3 tenors, SEL, behavior, academic. Think about those 3. And then underneath that, how are we building tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 structure in order to support that? Now, kids can go up and down and move through the structure. There's also another one in the chat I haven't answered yet, but I'll answer kind of here now, is kids kind of get stuck in these. Well, you got to remember, I'm a big proponent of MTSS. MTSS is not the bridge to special ed. It's actually the dam. You're trying to slow it down, but there are kids that have gone into intervention and they're not responding, of course, to tier 1. Then they go to tier 2, not responding. You're more frequent, you keep doing it again and again. Then you move to another one and it's more intense and they're not getting it. Then it maybe that time you move to referral, or you bring in someone outside or from the special ed world to say, hey, can you help me? Am I doing this right? So it may also be looking at your fidelity, is how well are you doing the intervention? Just because you're doing it doesn't mean that you're doing it the right way or the proper way, or maybe you need to switch an intervention. So think of those 3 columns coming down, and how are we building the structure of the strata inside of that to support kids at every level. in their learning, in their behavior, and in their social emotional.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I love the MTSS as a dam, not a bridge, because I do think some people think, let's just move them along, But I also think too is great questions about, identifying what the specificity is. I mean, when we talk about the core, when we talk about using advanced organizers, a school district or a school might adopt, we're going to promote advanced organizers as a core instructional curriculum strategy. And we train teachers on how to use advanced organizers at that tier 1 level. We've also trained teachers that we're going to teach our students proactively and preventatively that when you walk in the classroom, we want you guys to say hello, greet us with a nice greeting, and go sit down quietly. So we're putting teachers at the door. That's a core behavioral curriculum, is how do we enter a room, how do we raise our hand, and so on. A social emotional is being asked, hey, how are you doing today? Self-reflect. And then if you're not doing well, how do you self-manage? So that could be a core strategy. And then when you go to the tier 2 is saying, now what do I do in core strategies when my students are not responding to that advanced organizer? Is to say, do I have components in place that say, I'm going to bring in 5 kids in the back of the room. I'm going to do some more group work on how to expand what an advanced organizer really does, and how we're able to do these thinking maps, these concept maps. And I'm bringing kids back to say, here's kind of how the thinking's going. And so you'll notice now I'm building my tiers. So there's my multi-tier systems. Same with behavioral core. How do I work with kids in the back about how do we establish ourselves when we walk in a room? Why is it important? Sometimes kids just need extra minutes to process why it's important to walk in the room and how that manifests into teachers treating you differently and so on. Same with SEL. If I'm not able to self-manage or self-think or self-reflect, then the teacher's going to have to stop and walk me through that process. And then the last one is that tier 3. So you see, when you're asking questions about what are those MTSS components, it's just what kinds of tier levels of interventions do I apply at that tier level that matches those needs. And again, intensive, what are some intensive instructions? I'm going to do some individual work on concept mapping. I'm going to be working 3 times a week instead of 1 time a week with my group, or direct instruction. So it's going to look different. And again, walking into a room, this would be the ideal MTSS, where I walk into a room and it looks a lot like differentiated instruction, where you walk into a room and you're noticing kids working on self-projects. You're walking, seeing the teacher in the back working, and then you've got a mentor or a paraprofessional or another teacher working on a student one-on-one. So whatever you see in that classroom, you're able to see, oh, there's the multi-tier systems in play. That's how it's manifested in that classroom. But again, those don't happen unless you ask teachers, can you really put your hand on those components of multi-tiers? When kids start to manifest different kinds of problems, are you able to apply those components? That's why you guys have got to ask those questions about what's in play. You're going to find when you do these evaluations that there might be some teachers that are awesome at tier 3, but they really struggle with tier 1. They're really good with that individual student. They work really well for the one-on-one, maybe even some group work. But some of our teachers struggle with bringing the group, the whole class to a concept. So again, what are things that we need to do to establish that multi-tier systems of support? And then once we do that, then we move to how do we evaluate the implementation of our multi-tier systems of support structure. So, we're looking at our leadership, we're looking at our RTI model, how are we implementing all those big steps in order to get to where we need? And so again, the first one is just being able to say, how do we implement? It's interesting when we look at when we talk to teachers and ask a teacher, how do you teach this math concept? And the teacher says, well, we're going to teach double digit multiplication by following these steps. Teachers are amazing at that. Master teachers are. Sometimes I think we forget as we move out of the classroom that when we present things to teachers, sometimes we forget that specificity. And the schools that have had success in building PBIS structures, SEL curriculums, RTIs, and multi-tier systems of support are the ones that say everything we're trying to do, we're able to really craft or create this step-by-step way on how we implement the structures. For Ask a Teacher is, hey, Mrs. Johnson, can you tell me how to problem solve when you've got two students who are not able to understand division? Can you tell me how you work through those when you talk about two kids that are just unable to listen to direct instruction without interrupting, or are emotional and have outbursts because they're angry or frustrated? Can you tell me, how do you work through that? And again, as you present this is how we want our tier levels to work in the classroom. Are we actually saying, are we implementing those steps? The core curriculum, the targeted, the intensive. Are we evaluating? Are we problem solving? Are we making database decisions? Mr. Marafa, have you analyzed what's going on in your room, and not just academically, but behaviorally, social emotionally? Are you doing that? Yes. Okay. So you're implementing steps 1 through blank. And again, that could be different at every school level, every community level, every district level on what we're trying to implement. So a lot of times, again, as you guys start to promote these different interventions and strategies, it's kind of like the people that say, I want to do Leader in Me. Well, Leader in Me can be a program, but how do you implement that program is a lot of times there are no implementation steps given to the very people that you want to implement. And then there's really no follow-up in how do you problem solve? How do you look at the data to make those data decisions on whether we need to move right or move left, and so on. And then again, we look at fidelity checks. So again, step 1 would be, hey, Doug, we're doing really good at implementing our steps 1 through 5. But you know what we're not doing? We've got teachers that are struggling to deliver those kinds of components the way they were trained, or the way we promoted it or presented it. Well, why is that? And you know what? I worked with a teacher. She was doing a universal screener, and she was doing universal screener lesson plans. And she said to me, she goes, Doug, the system says do it A, B, C. And she goes, I don't want to do A, B, C. And I said, why? And she said, because it works really well when I do ACF. And I said, then you need to do ACF. And I said, do not be afraid to pivot with your programming, but give the feedback to your program people and say, look, I think we ought to change our implementation steps to reflect this. And so now 1 through 5 changes. And now that you've changed the steps, now I'm able to deliver with fidelity. So sometimes fidelity checks, you might find that your implementation steps really aren't the most effective. And again, asking teachers, asking students, asking staff, the specialists, the people that support the classrooms and so on is, are we looking at those fidelity checks? Are we delivering how they were designed? And how often are we asking that question? Progress monitoring, again, we do a really good job with academics through our benchmarking. That's great data and really understanding how we're implementing some of the core curriculums that we do. But again, we've got to be able to present that when we talk about behavior, when we talk about social emotional. Do we have benchmarks? We want 80% of our kids to demonstrate how to self-reflect, how to self-manage, how to be responsible, good decision makers. Well, what does that look like? And then how do we monitor that and to be able to say, check, our teachers are meeting that benchmark for our social emotional core and our behavioral core, as well as our instructional core. So again, how are we looking at our progress monitoring? Are we doing it enough? Are we doing it too much? Sometimes I've seen districts where they're progress monitoring way too much, and all it does is stress the teacher out, which invariably stresses the students out. That's one of the things. My wife's a fourth grade teacher, and she talks frequently about one of the few positives out of COVID has been the removal of some of these state testing, the promotion of these state accountability tests, where some of the students feel so much better, so much less anxious on having to worry about all that state testing. So again, it does matter how often we progress monitor, but there's a kind of a sweet spot that we want to be able to do in looking at how we do that. And then the last one is really the constant adjustment. What's working and what is not. What do I need to adjust? What do I need to throw out? What do I need to add? And one of the things Dr. Bosman and I have noticed over the 15, 20 years as we've consulted is school districts, sometimes the schools are quick to just throw out instead of really saying, maybe we just need to tweak that a little bit. Maybe we just need to really add just that small little element, and it'll make that whole picture really better, more effective and easier to implement. So again, that implementation narrative, when we look at how we evaluate, break it down into these sections about the steps that'll lead us into we're doing it. Then let's check fidelity, so we can check that consistency, how often teachers are doing it. And then let's make sure that we're applying some kind of progress monitoring. School districts that use universal screeners for their behavioral or universal screeners for their social emotional, if they do that 3 times a year, it's a great way as a snapshot of how well their core, their targeted, and their intensive strategies are working. But if we're never asking, just looking at office referrals for behavior, that might give you a small insight on what's going on, but it's not going to give you a full picture about what the overall behavioral progress or social emotional progress is for your students. So let's look and deep down dive into that progress monitoring and so forth. Dr. Bosman, anything on implementation?
Yeah,
I know you're answering those chats.
Yeah, but I'm just listening to what you were saying as well. It's fidelity checks. You got to be careful with those as well, because teachers may say this works for me, and that's just because of their own skill set. That doesn't mean it works for the kids. So we've got to, and that's both. That's in any of those components. Academically, I think about math. Well, I don't know how to teach math computation 3 different ways. I know how to do it this way. Okay, well, you might want to learn the other ways too. That way, because another student may pick up on the different way. But as far as progress monitoring, I always think of triangulating data. So if you're doing screeners and you're doing progress monitoring, and maybe you're using office referrals or classroom incidents, you're using something to kind of capture a big picture. Don't use one in isolation and think that you have the picture just because that's what's being painted from one piece of data. And then the last one, when you're evaluating it, again, if you're synthesizing the right data, the evaluation should be pretty simple, and it should be pretty well evident what's happening in front of you and where you need to move. So I think it's going to be the front loading, making sure we're getting stuff in place so we can make the adjustments as we go. And it's okay to say this statement: the intervention didn't work.
Yeah, exactly.
And move on.
Right. And we would expect that. I mean, I know as a behavioral consultant, and I know Dr. Bosman has this experience as well, is sometimes you're going through several different strategies. And then the cool thing is when you finally, I would expect, of the strategies that some of them don't work, but then you land on that 1 or 2 that are really effective, and we need to promote those. And I think it's just, like I said, it's a matter of working through that problem-solving process, looking at the data that we're able to get to that point where you say, man, these 2 things work for this student, for this class, for this community, and so on. So, all good points, Dr. Bosman. Thank you. And then we go to the communication, is looking at, again, districts that have struggled sometimes with building that bridge to staff members. especially when we talk about buy-in. The two things I think here are districts that really promote teacher efficacy. We want to promote student efficacy in the classroom, and we want to promote teacher efficacy if we're trying to really promote the multi-tier systems of support that we're highlighting and that we're adding to our model. And that's only going to happen if staff members see that their efforts are paying off. And that comes in the form of small successes. Small successes is the only thing that's going to breed confidence. Confidence is the only thing that's going to breed self-efficacy. And remember, there's a big difference between being confident as a teacher and having a strong self-efficacy in teaching mathematical concepts to students. Self-efficacy is a more unique, more targeted skill set for our teachers, and they're not going to feel that if you guys aren't communicating. It's kind of like when a teacher says, guys, Miss Johnson has notoriously shown progress, the most progress for her math students year in and year out, even though she has different students. And we're not promoting Mrs. Johnson so that we can make everyone feel bad. What we're doing is we're promoting Miss Johnson to say her efforts, and let's be very specific about what those efforts are, as we need to buy into that core. And then we also need to say is once we have those models of things that work, then we've got to make sure it's kind of like saying is throughout the year, how often are you asking staff members if this works? How often are you asking staff members, are we on the right track? What needs to change? The very people that are implementing, that are being asked to do the work, sometimes are the last people that we ask if this works or if this is really effective. So again, I think really strong districts that have established multi-tier systems of support with high fidelity and have seen progress, they're the ones that are constantly trying to communicate with staff on what efforts are showing progress, what efforts are not, and how we change it, and then getting that feedback from staff. Same thing works for parents. How often are we communicating to parents all the efforts that are going on within the district, within the school, within the classroom on how we're trying to develop MTSS and the purpose of developing multi-tier systems of support? It's a whole umbrella. When we talk about attendance at the high school level, we're talking about MTSS. When we're talking about something that's going on socially emotionally on the third grade level, we're talking about MTSS, multi-tier systems, and we want to implement what we can't implement if we don't evaluate and we don't share that with the parents, especially if we share it and the parents buy into what our philosophy is. Then they're going to promote that on the weekends and at night when the kids get home and so on. And again, asking parents, do you see evidence of your child being able to self-reflect more frequently, be able to walk into the house with more respect, or be able to say, hey, I'm able to write more effectively. I'm able to solve math problems more efficiently. I'm able to understand science concepts or do art concepts or, something extracurricular. So again, are we really bringing in those parents through surveys, through questionnaires, through, just all those things in order to kind of understand what it is we're trying to do with MTSS? Dr. Bosman? Anything on communication?
Nope. Just saying the word itself. You got to communicate to each other.
Yep. So the last piece before we, kind of look at maybe some of the chats is really just a total rudimentary example of being able to pull all this together on a particular tool. So Dr. Butler and I really just quickly put together, all this is an Excel sheet that we said, okay, if we were going to look at these components and we wanted to develop something that says, we would simply say, we're going to have a rating system that says, do we have components in place? And if we do we have fidelity checks? And if we have it in place without fidelity, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to do some training. Let's follow up with some more training. And if we don't do that, what are we going to do? Do we have database decisions based on the fact that we are implementing with fidelity? So now our data should be good so that we can make those database decisions, you know? So again, it's just an Excel sheet that says, are we looking at response to intervention? Are we promoting the components of response to intervention? Again, make your own up or find tools out there that are able to do an evaluate. There's so many tools out there that you can get for free, or like I said, take some, maybe create your own. But what we want to be able to do is the evaluated process has to be a way that allows us to say we're able to really look at our actionable steps. And really, the evaluated process, number one, should be how do we validate the efforts that you guys are. I mean, some of you guys have been here every time on a 4-part series. There are probably 1,000 things you could be doing, but you're trying to figure out a way to how do we do. So we need to validate those efforts by sharing all the positive progress that we've made with our MTSS efforts. But we also, again, through that evaluated to say, what are the pieces that we need to validate? What are the pieces that we need to change? And what are the pieces that we need to remove? And this is the bottom line, the evaluated process should always breed actionable steps. You should always be linking actionable steps from your evaluated process. And like I said, this was totally just something we thought, let's what if we were going to do this real quickly, what would we do? And that's, again, if we were doing a tiered level, we had screenings, using a screener. How do we implement screeners? How do we do problem analysis or data analysis? Some schools, like I said, they're good about collecting data, but they don't really know how to organize it and analyze it. That's MTSS, is how do we do that? And so on and so forth. And again, just looking at the idea of being able to say, how do we put all this together? So again, we just wanted to show you kind of a sample screenshot of just something we put together. The last thing we're going to do is really look at, before we end and kind of wrap it up together, we wanted to ask one more question. So Sherry, can we go ahead and do the next poll before we wrap it up? Sherry, it looks like the questions are way below. They can see them. Oh, there we go. Never mind. And this is really just, a way for, and I'll talk about it in a second, what we were thinking. Dr. Boswell, what do you think?
Yeah. Again, no major surprises.
No. Yep.
And I think, someone mentioned earlier in the chat is about resources. They're putting money and resources into something, but they still just don't have enough bandwidth to cover it. So then they're trying to scramble and find more stuff. As you said, there's lots of things out there that are free that give you some ideas of what interventions you could use, but it's really going to come down to using the resources you have in your own buildings, talking with people that may be considered, and I'm doing air quotes, you can't see me, experts in their field, that you're going to have to communicate with each other. And there's a great talking point in the chat that someone who just did their dissertation about communication and talking from home to school and school to home, not using a power struggle, your equals, getting input from both. That's huge. And not this mystery of we're doing this and this is what we're doing and we're only doing it here. If you're doing something at home or at school as an intervention, it's probably good to share that with the parents so they could try it at home as well. Sometimes the environments are very different, but at least that they're hearing the same verbiage and terminology throughout the day. They're getting it 24/7 versus 8 hours versus not 16. So, I mean, I don't see any things that I like webinar coaching.
Exactly.
That's cool.
Yeah. So where we'll end with is Dr. Bosman and I thought, and it goes to that poll question, is we have heard from a lot of people that have either participated in the webinar or watched the webinar at a later date, is they really want to understand the process. And so what Dr. Bosman and I thought is maybe offering a more of a coaching series, which really goes into the detail. And what I mean is that Dr. Bosman and I, we used to work with, for the state, and when we talked about trying to adopt RTI and PBIS models of intervention, is a lot of districts would say, Doug, there are 100 programs out there. I don't know which one to pick for my community. And I said, I know you could if you had the time, but let us talk you through that process of how do we select those specific resources that probably fit based on our needs. And so what Dr. Bosman and I want to do is take this model and take us through a coaching series next year, provided people are interested. And it sounds like just people on the call, that obviously we've got, 40% of the people that say, hey, I'd like to be part of a coaching series so that we could get more precision in developing these particular components and the functions of MTSS. So just to let you know, is we're going to do that. I think that we're in the process of developing it. So be looking for that coaching series next year. It'll obviously be a lot more than four parts because it's going to take more to walk people through it. So hopefully that'll come out soon and so on. So again, Dr. Bosman and I are here. Please reach out to us at any point. Wherever you're at in the world, we're all, obviously struggling with trying to support our students. And we'd love for you guys to be able to be a part of that and so on and so forth. So again, Dr. Bosman, anything in the chat as we finish up the last few minutes of the webinar?
Not that I see that I haven't answered. One that I did get, coaching series would be wonderful. So that's good. That's, we're right on track with those folks. There is one is the link to complete the evaluation. So I know Sherry will be working, having them get what they need. But yeah, it's, I've enjoyed doing the 4-part series. It's been a lot of fun. It is a lot of stuff that's going a mile a minute. We are in a crazy time, but as Dr. Marafa said, feel free to reach out to us. We love talking about this stuff and doing these things, and would help in any way that we can to get you kind of moving and wherever you are in the process. Because that's why we did the poll. There's people all over the place.
That's right. And we do the training and the consulting too. So just anytime you guys need us, let us know, and we can try to figure out how to do that looks. But that's all I have, Dr. Bosman. I wish everybody on the call the best. I wish you good luck. My thoughts are with all of you. If you're a prayerful person, my prayers are with you. If not, great thoughts. Dr. Bosman, your goodbye.
Same thing, you guys. Yep. I know that we're in the home stretch of a crazy year, and there's probably still a lot of uncertainty about how next year may start. So just excited that you guys were here, and the only thing I can say right here, Doug, is that they would love to have the coaching series start before the beginning of next year so they can get prepped and moving quickly. So
maybe
something we can think about.
Start in the summer then. That's a great idea. Okay. That's a good feedback. Okay.
Absolutely. Thanks everybody for coming. It's been awesome.
Thank you, Sherry. Thank you.
Thanks, Sherry.
Yep. All right. Thank you, Dr. Bottom, and we'll talk to you later.
You bet.
All right. Bye-bye.